And this one looks like a really interesting semi-cooperative social deduction game. And in this game, the president has been given 5 threats from an assassin, each with a date and a demand. And if that demand is not met by that date, well, then bad things are going to happen and potentially get that president murdered. One player is going to be playing as the president, which can be randomly chosen. Then there's going to be a few different president cards that all play a little bit differently that you're going to be able to choose from. And then all the remaining players will be able to draft a asymmetrical character card with its own special ability. But then they'll also be assigned a alliance card, which is going to give them an allegiance to the president or to the assassin. And if your goal is to try and kill the president, there's 2 ways that you can do that. You can either elect for a vote, where players will be spending their influence to try and tip the vote either one way or the other, or you can try and kill the president by inciting civil unrest. Causing enough civil unrest can create riots that can cause a lot of difficulty for the other players and can also cause more riots to occur. And all of these things can raise the threat level track, which if it reaches the end, well, the king being a live problem will solve itself. But the way that this game works is that players will be taking turns performing actions, and there are a whole bunch of different actions that you can take in this game, and there's a whole bunch of resources that you can gain as well. And you can spend those actions to gain those different resources. There's the influence cards, which you'll be using to influence different decisions or votes. You can gain money, which goes into a shared pool for all players to make use of, or you can gain science tokens, which is more of a personal benefit because they go straight to you, and then you can spend those later with another action to gain science cards, which gain you special abilities. And there's 2 ways that you can add money into the pool. You can just straight up spend one of your actions to get money into that pool, or you can spend one of your actions to raise the taxes, which doesn't get you money right away, but it gets you more in the following rounds. And although gaining money can be helpful to the overall cause, it also causes civil unrest. So it can be a convenient way to disguise your motives. And the interesting thing about the civil unrest and the riots that it causes is that when a riot occurs, you're actually going to be covering up one of the action spaces with a riot token, and this is going to be assigned randomly, but it basically blocks off that action space as an option until players are able to clear that space of the riot. And there's a few different ways that you can do that. You can either prevent a riot by spending an action to protect an action space, or if the riot is already there, you can spend actions to try and remove active rioters. Players can also spend an action to put out beacons, which kind of act like fluid actions that can come and go throughout the game, because you can also spend actions to get rid of those. And these action spaces behave a little bit differently because they can only be used maximum once per round. And of course, like I mentioned before, players can spend an action to call a vote to assassinate one of the players at the table. And whenever that happens, all players get to assign as many influence cards as they like into a shared pool of cards. And then all of those will be revealed, and depending on which side it lands on, a player will either be killed or spared. Whenever a player is killed, their allegiance is going to be revealed, and depending on what that is, they're either going to be reset as a new character, losing some of their resources, or they basically lose everything and then can only perform influence actions for the rest of the game. And at the end of a player's turn, they're just going to do one more thing, and that's to draw and resolve a brief card. And this is going to give that player a choice to manipulate the state of the game in a certain way. Or it could also have a choice that all players can influence, and depending on the influence that players contribute to that, it can have different in-game effects. After all players have had a turn, you're going to resolve the first threat, and if it's a fail, there's going to be negative consequences to that, which usually incites civil unrest and can cause riots or just straight up increase the threat level. And in order to succeed in these, you're trying to meet the demands, which usually come in the form of the different resources of influence, money, and tokens. And that is also one of the actions you can perform on your turn, is to contribute some amount of resources into that threat card. And the game continues like this until all of those 5 threat cards are resolved and the president survived, or it ends as soon as the president is killed. And of course, depending on your allegiance throughout the game, you'll win or lose depending on that outcome. This game looks like it has a really solid design, and I really only scratched the surface trying to explain this one, so I highly recommend checking this one out if it sounds interesting to you. If you like deduction, but you also like games with some meat on them, I think this one could be really interesting to you. So if that does sound like your taste, you can check this one out. I got links in the description below, and check out the campaign to find out more.